Friends, welcome back. Thanks for joining us as we start Thanksgiving week. A little bit of a short week for us. We'll have details as they unfold in terms of our schedule here. Definitely with you today and tomorrow as we continue through the Psalms, get probably pretty close to wrapping up the Psalms. Today, we have a category of Psalms, which if you've been with us, you know we've been trying to highlight a type of Psalm that is scattered throughout the Psalter, and we've been looking at several. Today is one I think, I don't know, tell me if you agree with this, Michael. It seems to me that there would be more of this in the Psalms than most people might be aware of. I think sometimes people would be surprised that there are enough of these Psalms to make it a category. And the title that it gets is kind of a church word, imprecatory, but that means to curse. And so these are Psalms that essentially call down curses on other people. And typically in the personal Psalms, that's enemies of the psalmist. In the national Psalms, it might be other nations or enemies of Israel. It may say something about our humanness, Michael, but there's a lot of this in there.
Yeah.
More than I think people realize.
Yeah, absolutely. Because the Psalms are living in the realm of human reality in a way that I think sometimes we maybe don't give the scriptures credit for. I think we often think of the scriptures as being like a roadmap or being a guide or being a devotional source of meaning in our lives. It certainly is all of those things. But the scripture also recounts in a very raw and human way the experience of living life. And you've got to factor, I mean, Clint, check me on this, but I think one of the things that these types of Psalms do is they are built on top of the foundation of trust that God is present and that God cares, that God is active in our lives in a meaningful way. And so the upshot of that, or the so what of that, is if you are in a circumstance where the circumstance is against you, where there's a person working against you, where there's a large national societal enemy that is set against the people of Israel, whatever the context is of the psalm, there's this assumption God cares about his people, that God cares about the well-being and the furtherance and the love and nurturing of those people. And so therefore, these psalms have in the background behind them this kind of trust that God is going to bless those things that are a blessing to the people, that God's going to curse those things that stand in between the people and their furtherance. To modern readers, especially to those who are reading the Psalms post Jesus Christ, I think that these Psalms might sometimes strike us as being very harsh. That's a conversation we're going to have. But I just think we need to start with that foundation, which is to say the psalmist assumes that God is there and that God cares. And then this comes out of those experiences of adversary.
Yeah, and I think also inherent in that, Michael, is the idea that God is just, and therefore the wicked are owed retribution and wrath, vengeance. In other words, the psalmist sort of presumes that his, in most cases, case is just, and therefore God should punish and will punish the wrongdoer. Before we jump in here, I think one word of caution. I do not think that Christians, I think that Christians, while recognizing the sentiment behind some of these psalms, behind some of these words, should be tempered by the words of Christ, the words of the New Testament. Don't take revenge, bless those who curse you, pray for your enemies. I'm not sure we should. I think it would be dangerous for us to take these as permissive, as if we can start simply wishing bad things or praying to God to do bad things to those that stand against us. So I think these are interesting. I'm not sure they should be inspirational, but let's look. Psalm 109, which is a wonderful example of what we're talking about. It says a Psalm of David. So here we have this intro: do not be silent, for the wicked and deceitful mouths are open against me. They speak against me They beset me with words of hate. They attack me without cause. So they reward me evil for good and hatred for my love. Now, listen to what David here writes, picking up in about verse 7. When he is tried, let him be found guilty. Let his prayer be counted as sin. May his days be few. May another seize his position. And then, this gets dark. May his children be orphans, his wife a widow. May his children wander and beg. May they be driven out of the ruins they inhabit. May the creditor seize all that he has. May strangers plunder the fruits of his toil. May there be no one to do him kindness, nor any pity for his orphan children. May his prosperity be cut off. May his name be blotted out. And this continues along those lines. Those are uncomfortable words. When you take them seriously, when you read them for what they're written as, those are dark. Those are hard-hearted words. And if you've been wronged, you know that there is that tendency to respond in that way. Again, I think that has to be tempered for Christians with New Testament teaching, with Jesus's teaching. But this is about as human as it gets. Somebody has done me wrong, and I want them to suffer. I want their family to suffer. I want terrible things to happen to them and to those they love. This isn't a part of the scripture, I think, that we wave around as a great example of the word.
I suppose, Clint, that some might come and want to make an argument to the fact that a person deserved these kinds of words, right? And I think to do that,
Sure.
you would turn to like verse 16 here. For this person did not remember to show kindness, he loved to curse, so let curses come on him. He clothed himself with cursing as his coat. So the argument I think you would make would be, hey, look, the psalmist is going out of his way to say this is an unrepentant person, that this is a person who had it coming.
Yeah, and I don't want to interrupt, Michael, but I think particularly you make that case in the Old Testament, the eye for eye kind of tenor that hangs over that. I think you're exactly right.
And on that note, if you wanted to pursue that further, I think you've got to be very, very careful, because fundamentally, as a Christian who's reading this text, you are reading this not just for the words and the idea that's here, but you also have to reckon with the reality of the revelation of Christ, who was the one who God took on flesh and literally bore the sinfulness on the cross before the mocking people and professed forgiveness, right? So the action of God demonstrates with revelation a radically different way of overturning these words. I would make a case here, Clint, and I'm going to trust you to push back on it, but I think a Christian reading this text would go a little wrong trying to define how bad the person is to justify these words. I think a Christian might look at this and say, the honest truth is, anyone who's been self-reflective about the brokenness of our hearts can resonate with these words, that we too have wished ill upon our enemy. We found ourselves in a situation where we did not see redeemable in the life, the visage of another person. And these words resonate in that. And truly, God is the ultimate judge, right? God has a way of sorting the wheat and the chaff. And ultimately, the good news is you and I aren't the judge of that. We don't need to be referees. What we are as people are those with this foundational reality, with the experience of having known people in our life who did not show kindness, who did love to curse, who wore those curses even as a garment around themselves. And yet we're called once again to show up with the kind of image and action that Jesus Christ showed up with. These words, I think, become a reflection on a state that is true, and then they open a question of the so what do Christians do with that?
Well, there's a human part in each of us that revels a little bit in people getting what they deserve, right?
Right.
If people have taken advantage of others, if they've stolen, if they've lied, when their name hits the news and they're in scandal, there's a part of us that says, Yeah, they deserve it. And that's certainly going on here. Again, we on this side of the resurrection of Jesus, we have to temper this with what we understand he taught about the way that we try to manage that part of our humanness. Having said that, Michael, I think maybe one of the reasons that these Psalms surprise us in the Old Testament is that there's very little of this voice in the New Testament. There's obviously some warnings about God punishing the wicked. There's ultimately, the book of Revelation that shows God will triumph over evil. But there are not, I can think of very few places where the voice of a character or an individual in the New Testament is calling for destruction and hardship and punishment and horrible circumstances for other people. It's something that transitions out to some extent between the two testaments.
Well, and I think that the way that this blends in other genres that we have in the Psalms is really interesting too. To point that out, let's jump to Psalm 139
Yeah,
here.
great example.
I think you've got this idea where it starts in a very personal, individual self-reflectiveness. You have this idea of you've searched me, you've known me, this idea that God is intimately aware of the inside of our life, right? You can't even go to Sheol or the bottom of the sea. You can't get away from God's presence. In fact, God has been there in the creative part of our lives, just skipping through this very quickly. And then let's land on verse 19. Boom. Oh, that you would kill the wicked, O God, and that the bloodthirsty would depart from me. Those who speak of you maliciously and lift themselves up against your evil or for evil. Do I not hate those who hate you, O Lord? And Clint, this is big. I think this transition helps us understand the foundation upon which this is built. On one side, there's a humility and a self reflection, admitting that God knows the innermost parts of our hearts. And so, therefore, there's this awareness that God judges the evil and unrighteousness inside us. And then, on the other hand, but God, I am set against those who are evil and who are dead set upon that position, upon those who even stand against the Lord. Who in the world could stand before a righteous God? I know I'm not righteous, is one way of saying it. I know that I'm not righteous, but God, I show up aware of that unrighteousness, and those who stand against God, those people are going to get what they have coming for them.
This is a really well-known psalm. People love this psalm. I praise you, Lord. I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works. My frame was not hidden from you. How weighty are your thoughts? The sum of them, I try to count them. They're more than the sand. I come to the end, and I am still with you. I think for many people who love this psalm, they think, or they might like to think that's where it ends, right? And then we turn to this idea, I wish you would kill people. I hate them with perfect hatred, a phrase that is ironically interesting. I think that Psalm 139 is a great example of the multiple natures of being human. There is this heart cry of praise and of endurance, and then the anger that goes with being on the receiving end of injustice and calling out to God to balance the scales and make it right. And again, I don't think this is permissive for Christians. I don't think we can all of a sudden say, this is my new favorite psalm. I'm going to be out there calling for, people's deaths and hating people. The messaging has evolved since then, but we all know that this lives within the human heart. We are all capable of this. And so I think, again, the fascinating reality that when those people of faith, centuries, millennia before us, wrote it up, that they even wrote that experience into the scripture. That's instructive, it's humbling, it's confessional, it's all of those things. And I think um, the Psalms are a wonderful mirror to hold up and see parts of ourselves, even parts we may not be entirely comfortable with.
I think there's two really quick things there. The first is, this is going to sound obvious to say, but bear with me. People are unique creatures of God, and different personality traits, different life experiences, different families that are grown up in, people are going to have different predispositions, and some people are going to resonate with different places of the Psalms more than others. And so if we're doing this and you've somehow made it through this part of the video, but you say, man, this seems strange to my experience, I can't imagine thinking this. I just want to assure you, as pastors who work with people, that there are folks who get this intuitively, who just say, when I sense that injustice in the world, it makes me angry. I show up like in Inside Out with the fire above my head, right? And it's just some people, that's their inner experience of the world. And if that's you, then the second thing is this: this is in the Bible, and it's directed to God. I just want to make that clear, right? That this is given up as a kind of prayer and reflection, and regardless of whether the content makes you uncomfortable or not, I think the point here is this is held in discourse with the righteous God. So that's an important heart orientation, that no matter what your expression is in this moment, whether that be a move towards forgiveness or whether it be harboring pain, guilt, anger, wherever you are in that continuum, direct it towards God. The Psalms shows us that there's a comfort level with those ancient people of faith to say that God can take that God's able to be present to you even in that. And there's a way in which expressing it may even create an opportunity for God to work in the midst of an otherwise sealed heart.
Yeah, and a willingness to say, God, do what is right. I wish they would be punished. God may not.
Right.
God may not acquiesce to that. God may not give in to that. God may not agree with that. But again, the permissiveness that the Psalms do give us is to share our inmost heart with God, hoping that God will change us and adapt us and mold us into the people that he wants us to be. So I think a very interesting, and just in case, we didn't get very deep into this, but in case you're thinking, well, just a couple of Psalms, there are dozens of these. I mean, this is not unknown territory in the Psalm. Curse our enemies is well attested in this book and in most of the Old Testament. That is one of the changes, I think, that Christ institutes, and you see it relatively clearly when you compare the teachings of Jesus with some of these harsher words.
Yeah, look up 35, 52, 58, 83, others.
Bunch of others.
A lot of it's woven throughout. The interesting thing here is, turn a couple pages, Clint. The rain falls on the just and the unjust, right?
Yeah.
And the reality is, the Old Testament is comfortable with things held in tension in a way that we often struggle to hold in our modern faith. And I think there's much to be stretched and much room for us to grow, that the same book that is exhaustively praising God for blessings, crying out to God in deep pain, is also raising up to God substantially pointed curses against the enemy. And all of that lives in a bundle. That's in there on purpose, and it's part of this holistic picture that the Psalms is really, really honest about.
Well, we'll see it tomorrow, but one of the great hypocrisies of the human heart is that a person can pray to God for forgiveness in light of his own sin,
Yeah.
but punishment for his enemies in light of theirs. So we all have that struggle.
And we hope that you'll certainly continue with us as we make our jump into that tomorrow. Certainly subscribe if this has been helpful. You won't miss studies like this, so we have more to come. And also like this video. It's not liked because it's simple or easy or even comfortable content, but because it might help others find it in their own study. We'll see you all tomorrow.
Thanks.